Welcome back. Now, as the political landscape intensifies the approaching election date, the focus on legislative changes and policy shifts has become paramount. Today, we delve into the complexities surrounding this election season, where key legislations like the NHI, the Public Procurement Bill, the Copyright Amendment Bill are under scrutiny. And joining us to unpack the impact of public policy during this time, or how elections impact public policy during this time, rather, is CEO of Elections Management Consultancy Agency of Africa, Lulu White. Lulu, a pleasure. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Lulu, you would have heard in my intro, I've cited only 3 pieces of legislation, all kind of hanging the balance right now. But what's very clear as we head up to the election is that some policies, some legislations are being rushed. Is this normal in an election year?
Look, I think if we have to look at the previous elections, we will see that this is actually something that is quite normal. Legislation being passed during an election year presents both challenges and opportunities. Challenges, obviously, because the necessary public consultative processes become shortchanged in the process, and often because of the speed of the need to pass this legislation on, a lot of people wake up and there's new laws and they do not know how that law basically came into effect. However, political parties normally do this because for them it is a benefit. They want to be able to show the voters that, look, this is the mandate that you sent us out with, and this is what we have achieved in the process that you've said, in the process that, or rather in the time that you've actually sent us out with. So it does present, it is a challenge for obvious reasons for citizens of the country, because there's not enough in terms of the law. 24 months. There's a process where a public consultation has to take place over a certain, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 24 months. Now, if legislation is only being passed now, when did that consultation take place? Where were the announcements that were made in public for people to actually bring in that legislation for comment? But political parties do have a tendency to do that because they believe that it is for their benefit. They want to be able to showcase their supporters that this is what they've done in the time that they've been in the office.
Then I must ask about, the constitutionality of these legislations, because of course we might push them through now before the 29th of May, Lulu, but that could be all riddled in litigation later. For instance, the NHI, many different parties threatening litigation there already. So is it worth the processes being rushed only for us to get to the other side of the election and spend time and time in court if none of it being implemented?
Certainly, it isn't worth the time, and also it isn't worth the finances as well, because obviously the minute the legislation is passed and then we come back and we find out that it's riddled with errors, it's riddled with inconsistencies, then there's a process where it actually has to go back. That is time, that is money, those are financial resources that taxpayers actually have to be paying for. So it's not worth anybody's time, both the legislators themselves and the actual voters. It's in nobody's interest to be able to do that. However, political parties, for some reason, for some odd reason, I do not understand. And I think I'm like many South Africans that actually feel that the NHI has been there for over 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. It was introduced 8 years ago. How come is it that we are still grappling with it now when the governing party should be saying, this is what we have done. It was done correctly. It has gone through the necessary measures. The checks and balances that need for this to be passed should have been done. 8 years is a long time to be waiting on one piece of legislation. And now, and you mentioned it correctly when you say there's actually quite a number of legislation that is still currently being debated. Why have we waited so long before that legislation is actually finalized? So it's unconstitutional because it really takes away the right of citizens to be able to participate in these things effectively.
And look at our own political landscape here at home. Of course, polls have gone out, Lulu. There's lots of conversations about either a change of guard or a dilution of the change of guard. Could some of these legislations also being seen as important to push through while a political party may have the absolute majority, where it is easy to push through these legislations?
I think the reality that South Africa needs to be grappling with right now is the fact that we do not seem to be going into this election. And I think we can easily attest to that, to the fact that in the previous national or general elections, we did see a decline in the majority of the ANC. And in the previous local government election, we've seen a number of key metros that have also been taken over as a result of a coalition. So no political party has actually come forth and had a majority in any of these things. Now, judging by that trend, then it becomes quite clear that even as we get into this election, we are probably going to see a dilution of political parties that actually rule the country within the coalition arrangement. Now, the challenges that we have seen, obviously, with the previous arrangements has been that service delivery has suffered. There's been a negative impact on service delivery as a result of these coalitions. Political parties actually participate in these coalitions mainly to get what they want out of the arrangements and the agreements that they have. And unfortunately, that has not been something that has benefited the citizens. It would be interesting to see how that would pan out in Parliament. But from what we have seen, the agreements to coalition arrangements right now are not strong agreements. There's no accountability that, these partners are not accounting to each other. There's nobody that's holding another person or another political party to account as far as ensuring that the key benefits or benefactors of this government system are actually getting the benefit for why they actually voted for these people. So obviously we are worried as citizens to say, are we going to see the same thing that we are seeing in local government? Are we going to see a dilution? And if there is a dilution, how can as citizens, how can we be guaranteed that the things that are supposed to be done for us, the services that are supposed to be delivered for us, are actually going to be delivered?
I must also ask you, Lulu, with the issue also of independent candidates and what that might mean for legislation, for public policy. What we know, for instance, now is that people toe the party lines and it's very easy for legislation to be passed. With the introduction of independent candidates, what does that even look like? Have we been able to put together a framework? Can we even fathom what it might be like to pass legislation with more independent candidates, with single seats possibly in Parliament?
Look, unfortunately, we also, once again, we've got history that we can actually look at with regards to our local government as well. And we have seen that because of the fragmentation of votes around the independent candidate, they normally generally do not have a lot of support, even when it comes to council. Now, if we have to translate it in Parliament, then we can also expect that they would need to do a lot of lobbying. And unfortunately, they would need to do it through political parties. And if they get into those type of arrangements, as much as they may not want to admit it or not, they will be somewhat forced to sort of toe a line of a political party that they've decided that they need support from. So as wonderful and as the idea of having an independent candidate is in Parliament, at the moment, the type of power to lobby as it would have been ideal to have them, they do not appear like they would be having it.
Sure, it is a rather concerning picture you might paint for us there. I also want to ask the issue of, I think, just policy uncertainty. We know that South Africa is known for strong policies that are seldom not implemented, but there are places where we have really good institutions. I think of the Reserve Bank, for instance. We kind of know what's going to happen with the Reserve Bank. In years of election, can we expect those kinds of strong institutions, Lulu, to maintain their strength, to maintain their independence, and not to kind of go into the cruise control that often comes with election years?
Obviously, definitely, we do know that there are institutions, and you rightly mentioned the Reserve Bank, Treasury is another institution that is like that, where we actually see that policies actually are adhered to and are taken care of in the manner that they're supposed to be taken care of. But unfortunately, we cannot say that about any other institution. I think that's just this is one of the challenges that we face. When the old guard changes and the new administration comes in, it does present certain opportunities. Obviously, for us as voters, opportunity is, are we getting a new political party? If that is the case, what is it? What type of low-hanging fruits can these political parties that are campaigning give us as the voters? But as soon as that process is over and done with, it's almost like people in Parliament and legislatures close their books and they say, oh, well, here we go again. And we're back to square one as a country.
Also, I must ask you, Lulu, globally, around the world, we're seeing this big election year. But also a very weird thing we're also seeing, and I use the word weird very loosely, is the issue of polarization, fragmentedness, lefties going left, righties going right. It really is the kind of environment that I never expected to see in my lifetime. But what does that tell us about the mood around elections globally here and the policy certainty globally? Could we find that a more polarized and fragmented world leads to a more fragmented and polarized policy environment?
Yeah, look, I think we can honestly see that there is a bigger polarization around political parties. And really, the reason for that is quite simply the fact that during election years, all political parties have an agenda. Right. And all of them, their agenda is quite simply that I have to prove to the voters, I have to show what I can do to the voters, or rather, what I have to show what I have done for my voters in order for me to come back to office. So at any given point where policy is concerned, one never gets the impression that when policy is being passed during this particular time, it is purely on the basis of the benefit for the citizens. It's always because they have to please their political party, they have to toe a particular political line, and they have to make sure that they garner as many votes as is possible. And I mean, we can see it globally. We've seen very, very strange, and you're correct when you say it's weird. We have seen very weird movements as far as policy concerns are actually concerned in this particular election period. Unfortunately, the voter seems to be the only person whose interests are not normally taken care of. Of course, when they come for campaigning, this is not what they tell us. They're there to actually convince us as much as possible onto why we must actually support the legislation that is being supported. But after that, then the real repercussions of what that legislation or what those policy shifts are actually come to the fold. And often we have seen that they've not been in benefit of the voter.
Something not to take, I think, for granted is just how young our democracy is. 30 years might seem like a long time, Lulu, but it actually just isn't. And I'm keen to get your thoughts on that one as well. Is this what it looks like for a democracy to be maturing, to be growing, to be contending with issues like coalitions? And do we have to see a bit of a rough patch, you know, a bit of a dip in reality before we see all of it coming together for something a little bit more cohesive that does benefit the citizen, as you say?
Look, it is time. I think when we do a trajectory of the democracy of our country, and we actually compare it with what has happened in the SADC and I wanted to say in Africa, particularly with the SADC. When we look at the shifts that have happened through the years, from between the ages of 25 to 30, that's where we see a lot of shifts as far as mass democratic movements are concerned. I think if when we do a study of how mass democratic movements are actually removed from political power, you then realize that the shift in terms of sentiment, they start coming from, you know, from 25, from 30. And that's mainly because the populace becomes younger. The people that go out to the polls become younger. The sentiment that old people actually had when they first ran or went into these elections is no longer there. Either those people are older or those people have passed away. So you see a very big shift as far as that is concerned. And I think you can also see also in our democracy, because from the stats that we've heard from the IEC, we've seen that there's a much younger voter registration statistic than there was in previous election. And that already shows you that in terms of where this election is going, the ANC is really under a lot of is under a lot of challenges, in the sense that they need to be able to convince younger people why is it that they need to be given another 30 years into the new democracy. What is it that they think they can achieve going into this election that they failed to achieve in the last 30 years? So what we are seeing happening with the South African governing party is not something that is unique. It is often 30 years is normally a time that generally the populace decides we have given these people enough time. Have they achieved what they wanted to achieve? If they haven't, where have they failed? Who is the alternative that we need to be looking at? And we have seen younger political parties coming to the fold. We've seen, and the fact that in South Africa, we've seen a lot of registrations around new political parties also presents us with the opportunity to show that actually now we are looking for alternatives. People are now looking for alternatives. Can they find alternatives in the new current political parties? That remains to be seen.
Before I let you go, Lulu, I must ask you about the issue of then policy in this context, specifically of a younger, population here. when we think of the processes that we've spoken about, consultation, public commentary here, do we have a young population that is well aware of the tools that they have available to them to affect public policy? Could we be doing a little bit more here? Could this be a mandate that we adopt here in South Africa to ensure that our those who are going to vote at least are more aware of what is happening in the policy and legislative space?
I believe civic education. I think one thing about South Africa is as well democratized as it is, I think civic education and voter education is something that really does need a lot of attention. And I think we see it often also when we have protests, where you still have communities that would destroy infrastructure during protests. That in itself tells you that not enough is being done in terms of educating people in the community to say, when you destroy a library because you want a road built, this is what it means in terms of the MTF, in terms of budgeting for the next 5 years for that resource. So obviously, on the basis of that, I always argue that there's never enough civic education that is being given to people as far as this is concerned. And legislation is often littered with jargon, with legal jargon that men on the street actually do not even understand. You say to somebody, we're talking about your rights and how you should be protected by the police when you are in a case of, for example, domestic abuse. And you go there and you realize that people still don't understand this. Women still go to the police station and they open cases and then they come back 2 days later. That in itself shows you that there is a lack of communication in terms of what the law is supposed to do for the people and whether it is actually being implemented correctly. And I don't know whether this is something that is deliberate, but I do think that there's not enough civic education that is being given to people so that they understand the legislation that is being passed through Parliament.
Well, Lulu, I hope we'll keep talking as we lead to the 29th of May. It looks like there's just a lot going on with us right now. But thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us on Business Lunch. That was CEO of Elections Management Consulting Agency of Africa, Lulu White.